This week we have Chris Anderson. He's program manager on the Azure App Service team, working on Azure Web Jobs and Azure Functions. Welcome, Chris.
Thanks for having me.
Can you explain your ghetto microphone?
Yeah, so I'm in this phone room here at Microsoft, and I just remembered that my laptop that I was going to record on doesn't have a microphone jack. So I've got this kind of daisy chain setup here where I'm listening through my headphones, but I'm connecting in through the office phone, and that's what this thing is right here. So
it's actually a good way to do it. It looks kind of silly, but it's actually
it's the right distance from my face all the time. It's
it's actually a better setup than most of our guests. So congratulations. So Carl, what's going on your side?
So we got some awesome news. Once again, we're a media sponsor for that conference that takes place in the Wisconsin Dells the first week of August. So if you're just looking for just an awesome polyglot conference to go to that's national level, but you don't want to travel really far for, that conference is awesome. We've both been there several times.
It's the best.
Great place to take your family to. They do so much for family, so much for bacon. I just can't recommend it enough. Mm-hmm. So for the second year in a row, we're going to be recording there. And so if you want to say hi, or if you got something cool that you want to share with everybody else, stop on over. We'll get you on.
Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, I probably won't be making it this year.
That's a shame.
Yeah.
So
go ahead.
I was going to say, you can go first because I was going to transition.
Okay. Because, I don't know if I mentioned on the show, but I'm moving out to Redmond. So everything is going to get crazy, crazy complicated. So I don't know what's going to be going on in August. And I want to make sure that we still dedicate the time that it takes to do this show. So I probably won't make it. I don't know if I'm going to do some kind of remote thing, but in any case, Carl will be there on site getting some great interviews.
Yeah. Welcome to Redmond. You can join us over
Thank you. Yep. And then we could actually be in the same room, and then I could actually let you use a decent microphone.
This is working, man.
It's working. It's working. Yeah, I guess if it works, don't laugh at it.
So the next item I have put in the notes is Jason the Trader.
Yep.
Jason was recently on another podcast. So that's what this is about. So I thought I'd give you just a second here to just, say what you were talking about.
Yeah. So if you wanted to hear more, I try not to get too meta on this podcast, but if you want to hear about why we started the podcast, a lot of what goes into it, how we keep increasing our numbers, those types of things, you can check that out. We'll have a link in the show notes because I can't remember the exact name of the podcast. It's like MyCasts or something. They do a couple different things, and they started up a podcast, so you can hear me over there. The interviewer was kind of interesting. He had some off the wall questions that threw me off a little bit, partway through the interview, and we won't do this to you, Chris. He's just like, okay, you're now on an island off the coast of Japan and you have a broken Nintendo. How do you fix it? And that totally threw me off because he didn't tell me in advance that he was going to do that. So that was a little bit challenging. But yeah, if you want to hear that kind of meta behind the scenes information, you can go check that out, and we'll have a link in the show notes.
Awesome. And now it's time for the Infragistics Ultimate Winner of the Week.
Yep.
This week we got some email from Eric Dunaway.
Yep.
He was asking if we're going to be putting our show on the Google Play podcast when it launches, because that is actually all in the news right now. And he also said that he just started listening to the show. He loves it and asks for us to please continue the great work. So the good news is we actually applied for it immediately.
Yeah, Carl was on the ball with this one. He sent me a message immediately. He said, "Hey, we need to set this up," and I think we set it up the first day. So we're good to go whenever this launches.
So we're already in there, but there are some interesting things about it because they reserve the right to, if we take down a show, that they'll keep distributing it only to people who have already downloaded it before. Okay. So there's some interesting things in there.
Kind of like how apps work, right?
Kind of. Yeah. There's some interesting things in their terms of services. So I'm just going to put a link to their terms of service for this podcast store, just so people can just realize that, hey, this is definitely a Google way of doing things.
Yeah, people are flipping out over it. I don't know. I don't have time to flip out over it. So
yeah, we're pretty laid back on this.
Yeah. So I don't know what else in there. I'm not a lawyer. So we'll be in there.
That's what they're counting on.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else on that?
No, on to the news, I think.
Yep. Sounds good. So let's see here. What do we got lots of good news stories this week. So postmortem for Google's compute engine's global outage on April 11th. So I didn't read this one. So what actually happened, Carl?
So there was like somewhere between a 15 and a 30-minute period where Google's entire cloud offering, every single service, was down, which is pretty big.
Yeah.
And one of the other interesting side effects, I think, from it is none of Google's services were affected whatsoever, which kind of shows you that Google does not write its own products on their own cloud. So, I mean, it was also a chicken and egg thing. Their services were generally around before their cloud services. So, I mean, you got to be a little bit fair on that.
That is no excuse. So,
but they also haven't moved any of them to there.
Yeah, Chris probably has more information than me, but I know that within Microsoft, everybody is really pushed hard to, it's kind of like the model, like test what you use what you test, as sort of as the rule for testing. But we sort of use the same type of motto for using Azure. It's like, you need to be using Azure. Like you shouldn't be buying your own hardware. You shouldn't be building your own infrastructure, because there's so many lessons baked into this. And even this, I mean, cloud services has gone down. Everybody goes down at some point. That's just kind of the way it goes. Everybody's getting better at it. So I think people are getting better and better at minimizing it and reducing any kind of infrastructure that is common, across regions and things like that. There's been a lot of lessons there. So all of these services continue to get better. But, I think this is probably a whole bunch of people are probably going to, like yell at the podcast whenever I say this, because it's going to sound like I'm totally spinning this. And I will admit that I am, but the way that I see it, and I'm totally drinking the Kool-Aid and everything. So I'm just giving you all of those disclaimers. But the way I see it, like every time there's an outage in one of these cloud providers, it is a lesson for everybody, and everybody fixes that, and we move on and we get better from that. The problem is if you're running your own infrastructure, you aren't necessarily, I mean, you're getting like a different set of lessons, but you could be like 5 years in the past. I mean, you're going to make silly mistakes that like Microsoft, Google, Amazon have already made and already fixed and already moved on from. So it's like, by building on their infrastructure, you're really on like the latest set of lessons and the latest and greatest understanding of how you actually operate these things at scale. So again, that's my totally, spinny Kool-Aid drinking, philosophy with this.
But that's the right brand of Kool-Aid right there. I mean, that's something that I like always hit on when I talk to customers. For a while, I was doing compliance work over in SQL, and I'd always get questions from customers like, are you compliant? Are you selling our data? Those kinds of things. And like we, work day in, day out, learn from countless customer issues to solve these problems so that you don't have to. That's the whole value of using the cloud, is the problem solved once for thousands upon thousands of customers.
Yeah, exactly. And people, I've mentioned this before, and again, it's more Kool-Aid drinking, but, people always think that their local infrastructure has zero downtime, but that's not true. I mean, to actually compare things, you have to do an apples to apples comparison, which is, you actually do have downtime. This other solution will also have downtime. So let's compare them on kind of an equal footing. And this was, a few minutes, and this could be devastating for somebody. So I don't want to downplay that, but, whatever happened here, I didn't read all the details. I would say there's a 99.999% chance like Google won't be hit by the same issue again. Like they'll learn from it and they'll improve.
I mean, it was really interesting that the Google actually, didn't go down. So they are running on the separate services. But
yeah, that's kind of shameful.
Although they're using the same stuff underneath the covers, I think that's something where, we're a little bit different in the sense that all of even our Azure services themselves are built on top of other Azure services. Right. So like when storage goes down, everyone's having a very bad time around here, but we work, and that means the storage is, all that much better here because everyone suffers. And to kind of prove that point, I mean, this is sort of a negative thing, but I mean, like the Azure status dashboard, like there was a big outage and like it went down at the same time that Azure went down because we are in such a habit of building on our own stuff, eating our own dog food that was just kind of silly, and now it's separated. Yep. But yeah, I think it's kind of a testament to that. So we want to run into those issues before customers do, for sure. Yeah, the mindset's definitely there right now.
Yeah. Anyway, I think we beat that one to death. Let's see here. React Native on the user or Universal Windows platform, UWP platform.
Yeah, there's React is getting just a huge upswing of people that are using it for their apps.
Oh yeah, it's killing
And
it.
yeah, it's really killing it. And now you can use React to write a UWP app. So you can make a mobile app or you can make a desktop app using React, using HTML and JavaScript. And it even uses like the native JavaScript rendering engine on Windows as well. So you get that performance from Windows, but you can still just not worry about it.
Okay. So I mean, your code would be, I guess your code isn't necessarily gonna be the same across all those, right? So you would, I mean, you're gonna use the React Native control, but it's gonna map to whatever that native control is. So you might still have to do some platform customizations.
Yeah, and I think where React differs from a lot of other projects, like a lot of them are like, we want you to write this once and it'll work everywhere.
Yeah.
Whereas React is like, we're going to write this in the way that makes sense for the platform.
Yeah.
And it's a little bit different, and but at the same time, you can make it a lot more cohesive feeling for what you want for your brand and what matches the platform that you're on.
Because you want to reuse the skills that you have, but you don't want to necessarily ignore platform differences. So that's kind of the compromise they made. Okay.
And I think it's a way to bring people that are used to doing these more modern JavaScript HTML apps, giving them another way to do that on the Windows platform.
Okay.
In a way that they're used to. So I think that's pretty powerful as well.
Okay. So this next one we can probably do pretty quick, but I didn't see, I was on vacation for the past week down in Clearwater, Florida, but Amazon's Kindle Oasis is the funkiest e-reader it's ever made. What is the deal with this thing? It's got like a weird thing on the side. It looks like it's super thin, right?
Yeah, it's less than half the weight of the next lightest Kindle ever. So It's very light.
Yeah.
But it has the same size screen. It has an interesting, like you said, bump along one edge of it.
Yeah.
But they said it's easy enough for you to flip. So if you're left-handed or right-handed, you can use it to, help grip it. Mm-hmm. To me, this is just kind of a really weird, it's the most expensive Kindle in the lineup right now. I forgot if it's $300 or $400.
$290. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's $300.
Yeah. No, thank you.
It has, many, many months of battery, even more if you have the battery cover. It's got more LEDs in there. I just have the Paperwhite and I'm super happy with it. And it's not even the most current one.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So for me, I don't know exactly who this is for. Maybe just the most,
I got mine for the Paperwhite. I got it for like $30 or $40.
Yeah.
That's all I need. So I don't know. I can't imagine spending $290 on this.
My wife was actually looking at that because she really prefers paper books, and she kind of liked the idea that it's got that little thick edge on the side to kind of hold on to it more firmly. Whereas the other one, you kind of like cradle. This one, you can actually like grip onto the side.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's one that might sell.
Yeah. So, but I think, as something that's sold in a digital way, to me, that still seems like something you got to get your hands on to like really understand if this is something for you, especially when you're going to drop down almost $300.
Yep. Okay.
So they have the Amazon stores now.
Yeah. Let's move on. Interview questions to ask. I just lost the window. To ask a potential tech employer. So what are they, Carl?
Well, so first things first, I think a lot of people fail to realize, when they're in an interview process, they really concentrate on being prepared for being interviewed.
Yeah. Answering questions.
Yeah. A lot of people fail to realize that, hey, I need to make sure that this company, this team, this department is a right fit for me as well.
Yep.
And to ask the kind of questions that aren't just technical questions, but also the social questions that really help you get an idea whether you'd fit in there or you'd even like working with them. Mm-hmm. If you don't ask these kind of things, you might accept it just because you passed. I mean, a lot of times we're super excited to just have a chance to interview at a really cool place. So not only is this a list of questions to ask, but the way he's done it, he listed these in YML, which he has a converter for JSON. That aside, I mean, he has a list of questions and what kinds of answers you should be expecting if you don't know the answer to those questions.
Yeah.
So I thought that was an interesting take on it too. And just to be ever so complete, I see that in 2008, you wrote a very similar blog post.
Yes, I did. Yeah, you sent this to me, and I'm like, is this my post? And then yeah, I went back. I just did a quick Google search, and I found or Bing search, and I found my blog post. Yeah, so it was 8 years ago now, which is a long time ago. I don't even know if mine make any sense. Did you? I don't remember what they were.
So, I mean, yours makes sense, but they're very, very focused in on, being a software engineer.
Oh, yeah.
Some of the stuff that's in these other questions are even like, how many hours did you work last week? Is this a team that, 40 to 45 hours is normal, or am I going to be doing 60 hours every week?
Some of those you got to be a little careful with. What I would do, we actually had, it was a coworker of ours, Carl. He, and I actually respected this quite a bit. He said, can I come in and mentor for a day? Like, I want to see what a day looks like. And we were like, sure, that's fine. And he actually came in and he sat with each of the devs. And then it was nice too, whenever he started, like he didn't have to get introduced to everybody because they already knew everybody, but he felt comfortable about it then. And I actually thought that was really cool because he really wanted to know what he was getting into, and he obviously enjoyed it. And then we ended up working with him. But that was kind of cool. And then you don't have to ask those questions. Cause I'd be careful with the one, how many hours a week do you work? Especially if you ask everybody, they're like, he was really concerned with whether or not we had to work more than 8 hours a day.
Well, I mean, in a very similar thing, when before I took the current job that I'm at, I wasn't able to actually go on site at their location because it is a good distance from my house. They actually came out by me to do the interview. And, once I was comfortable with, what they had to say about the job and whatever, I asked, hey, can I spend a couple hours? Can I come down to you now? And so, I did a very similar thing to, as cool. What you were just saying.
Yeah. Let's skip the next one. There's one that I want to get to though. Finally, CSS and JavaScript meet CSSX. So this is a way, I just kind of skimmed through this because you were the one that put this in here, Carl, but it's a way of using JavaScript to generate your styles. And this reminds me of, this has manifested itself in a lot of different ways previously. I remember like writing JavaScript from .NET, and writing one language from another always seemed like kind of the holy grail, and then eventually it just seems like a terrible idea. So I'm kind of curious if this is a good idea or not. Holy cow, this is long.
I mean, this is kind of an evolution.
This is like a novel.
It's like an evolution of like the JSX, making it easier to write HTML inside of JavaScript. And this is kind of the play.
Okay, which that one is, a lot of people would say is valid. Mm-hmm. And I guess I wouldn't necessarily disagree with it.
So, one of the things that, my kind of takeaway on this is when you look at how React does things, going back to that, a lot of times that mixes, you don't code in there like you would like an MVVM model or an MVC model. You really mix a lot of those things. And I think in an effort to, when you want to provide a widget and you want to provide a widget like an all-in-one package, having a technology like this to write it in makes that a lot easier, because you can write your JavaScript, your CSS, your HTML kind of all in one. And then when you include that in, you just get whatever that functionality is with the least amount of effort.
Yeah, I remember when CSS, first, I don't want to say it came out, but, I guess around that era, everybody's like, oh, yeah, your style is totally separated from everything else. And everybody was all excited. And it's funny how this stuff like sort of goes back and forth. And it's great. Just trying every combination of everything. So I'm going to reserve judgment on this. This could be really scary, but this could be really cool. And like you said, Carl, especially like if you're building your own thing, for the most part, like you really don't necessarily have to separate all that stuff out. You don't always have to do things in the name of good design if it's just for your own company. So this might be a huge time saver. And honestly, like I'm pretty pragmatic, so I'd rather save time than be correct and just tell everybody, oh, we totally did this correctly, even though it takes us twice the amount of time. So very good. But we'll have that in the show notes so people can check out what that looks like. Okay, finally. So let's get to our guest, because today we want to talk about Azure Functions, which when this was announced, I was so excited because just for a little bit of background, when Amazon launched Lambda, for example, I actually talked about it on the show. We don't talk about AWS too much, but I was like, this is so cool. Like I have to talk about it, and I wanted to kind of give them a little bit of credit for what they were doing there, because that was when cloud computing first came out. This is like what I had in my head was, I just have some code. I just want you to run it. Just make it so, just do it. So when I saw this, I was super excited because I want to build some really cool stuff on this. So before we actually get to the actual technology, why don't we talk about you? Tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do for Microsoft.
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, what my current job is at Microsoft is program manager for functions and web jobs and a couple of other things. Basically means I go and talk to customers. I understand how things want to be used. I think through the user experience, and then I translate that into kind of requirements. And we don't even really do requirements here, but I go and file an issue on GitHub for, hey, we should have this feature. And I work with the devs to kind of walk through that experience. Exactly. And so that's really what my job is basically just trying to think through problems, work with customers when they have problems, and try to come up with a solution with the engineers.
Okay.
All right. So I know not everybody has had a chance to see the build announcement. So can you tell us what Azure Functions is?
Sure. So in the simplest form, Azure Functions is a way of writing some code, very simple function, having that be able to react to events, whether they be HTTP, timer-based, or reacting to another service out there like Azure Queues, or we have like GitHub webhooks and things like that. And then not having to necessarily worry about the compute. We actually have two different flavors of running this. You can actually reserve VMs to run this on, or run this in our dynamic tier where you pay per execution.
Okay.
So really, it frees you up from having to deploy a whole application stack. You can just write function after function after function, not worrying about the scale that comes with that.
Okay. And right now, I think, do I have to do all of this through the portal today, or can I somehow write the code in like VS Code, or do I have to paste that into the portal? What do the mechanics look like?
So the cool thing about this is all built on existing technology. So this is built on top of Azure App Service, which has continuous integration and all that kind of stuff baked in. I will say that our tooling is just not great today. It's something that we're going to work on going on to GA, but you can actually, we have a great portal experience, so it's really easy to write some code in the portal. If you write some code in the portal, you can go up to what we call your SCM site and actually download all of your functions locally. And if you open that up in Visual Studio as an existing website, you can actually publish that back up to your function app, and it's the exact same code.
Ah, okay.
So it's essentially all these functions live in folders on your function app.
Okay.
And that then gets deployed up to www root on your function app. And so you can treat it just like you would treat a website when you're deploying code there.
Okay. And I want to make sure too that everybody understands exactly what we're talking about here before we get too deep into this. The exciting part for me, I'll tell you kind of my use case, and then we can talk about some of the other ones, because you mentioned like some kind of trigger happens, and then something happens, and then there's like an output. So we really have like input, processing, and output. For me, like the case that I always think of in my mind is that the input is an HTTP request, so some kind of call comes in that says, hey, please look up this record for me, or I don't know, just, calculate, add these two numbers together. And then, I write I do a lot of Node.js, but, I do C# and whatever, but let's say I'm in, Node.js, I'm doing JavaScript. I say, okay, this request comes in, I get two numbers as parameters. I'm going to add those things together, and then I'm going to return that as my HTTP response. So I always think of that as kind of my canonical example. So I'm just handling an HTTP request, but again, without a server. I'm not worried about like how this works. I'm just saying, here's my code, please run it. And then you mentioned there's different inputs and outputs. So what are some of the others? I know you can do like on a schedule. So I could like every hour I could do something, for example.
So the way that this works is actually based off of the WebJobs SDK. So, the WebJobs SDK has existed for a couple of years. It's one of our most successful features, but it was still kind of hindered because it was hiding behind web applications. And so it wasn't as accessible as we wanted it to. As powerful as the platform was, it wasn't accessible. And so WebJobs had this concept where you had a trigger, and you could also have additional data being input and additional data being output. So you can actually, we have triggers for HTTP, timer, queues. We have an event hub timer, a blob timer, or triggers.
Yep.
But then we have additional inputs. So you can, for instance, on an HTTP request coming in, fetch some data from table storage or from DocDB, which might contain like your user's information.
Yep.
And that way you don't have to actually make database calls inside of user code. Those are happening as part of the framework, and you can just worry about the business logic you have to write.
Yeah, and then like you said, you could do it from a queue or event hub. So if a record comes in from event hubs, I can get basically my code will sort of spawn up whenever that happens, and then it can process it, and then it just sort of disappears into the ether again.
Yeah, I mean the great way of thinking about this is an end-to-end sample. So for instance, I have an IoT hub, I have an IoT device in my car, I'm driving around, and I need to get a push notification. Maybe I'm going the wrong way or there's traffic coming up. You can actually have IoT hub using a stream analytics, kind of analysis job on there, output a queue record or something like that the function picks up and then sends a push notification down to your device. And the great thing is that if you only send one push notification a day, you only pay for that one execution on the dynamic tier, which means you don't need to worry about scaling that up. If you have a million executions, you don't have to worry about scaling that out, right? Let's say that one day out of 365 days in a year, traffic is bad. It'll still scale out and handle those notifications for you, and you don't have to worry about scaling it back down afterwards. So you can sleep at night, and you're happy.
I love it because it's funny. People talk about cloud all the time, and they always talk about scale up, and I always bring the conversation back to scale down because without scale down, that you don't get cost savings.
Yeah.
So I love that. I love that, especially for like me. Like I don't run some big company. I work for a big company, so it's like if I'm going to build, I have some just idea on the side, and I want to implement it. If I'm not successful, I don't want to have to pay anything. If nobody goes to my website, if there's never any traffic and I built a traffic app for, I don't know, like where I live here, if I built a traffic app for that, I'm never going to send any notifications. Like it's nice that I don't have to pay anything, but like you said, then I can just pay for, and just handle that upscaling. That's awesome.
And to that point, for simple things for individual developers, we're actually giving away, I think, 400,000 gigabit seconds of compute away for every month.
Yeah.
If you're using this. So it's really, really approachable. If you just have one simple job you want working with functions, you won't pay a dime for it probably. If you have something that's running under heavy load, you will, but you're getting a good value out of it for that.
I just thought of this and I apologize for taking us on a tangent. I do this every episode, but I was just thinking of like, there's this trend towards static websites. So like my personal blog is a static website. The msdevshow.com is actually a static site. It's all built and then it's completely static HTML. Like there's nothing to hack. There's no database. There's nothing. It's literally just HTML pages. So what's cool is like Carl and I, every once in a while, we're like, oh, we should add this to the site. And we're like, oh, well, it's a static site. Like we can't do that. So this actually is kind of neat because if we did want to have like just a function to go like do something, I don't know, some button that does something crazy on the site that gets some dynamic content. This actually would be an awesome way to do that because we can just have that single API call.
We have a core setting, so it's like inside the portal. So it's really easy to set up cores with just pasting your URL into there, and then boom, you can have this thing running in 5 minutes. So let's say you want to add like a high score API to a game that you have that's just a static, HTML5 game. This is one way of doing it in very, very quick amount of time.
That's awesome. I love it.
So you mentioned that for these we could just go to the portal and type in our code. So what kind of language support do we have at this time?
So we support a lot of languages, but when I say support, there's varying degrees of that. Our top tier support is Node.js and C#. Node.js, JavaScript's kind of like the English of programming languages these days. Everyone can write a little bit of it at least. But C# is kind of bread and butter of Microsoft. And then other languages like Python and PHP, PowerShell, Batch. These are in what we call the scripting tier. They're kind of left in the experimental category right now. And essentially, we just invoke them via command line. So we call like FSI, EXE, and then we call your F# code, which isn't ideal, but you can actually start writing some code there. And we're going to be promoting those experiences into kind of a more first-class experience like the C# and JavaScript. So actually, last night, Dom Syme from the F# team actually pushed a pull request or sent a pull request to us to add F# support first class to our runtime. So we're actually working on getting F# support. That'll probably happen this month or next month.
Well, that's great that there's like support in there today, though. I mean, I'd rather like get started today and then have you make it better. Again, on our discussion earlier, like that's the nice thing about the cloud. Like things will just keep getting better and better for me.
And this is all open source too, so you can
Yeah.
actually go and follow us along as we're adding
Oh, that's
support for these
awesome.
various languages. And if you're really passionate about adding like forth support to functions, you just
Yeah.
go ahead and send us a pull request, and we'll probably look at you like you're crazy, but we'll think about it.
Very cool. So you mentioned before that I could like pull these functions down, I could edit them, and then I could push them back up. Is there any kind of SDK or REST endpoint, or is that really the only way I can interact with these and as well through the portal?
I mean, so there's a variety of ways to do this thing because it's built on this existing platform. So there's just all these existing doors and windows we have to the thing.
Okay.
What we don't have is a really good, SDK CLI thing for pulling the thing down locally, editing it, and then pushing it back up.
Yeah.
It's mostly go and take existing tools and kind of string them together to get that going. So that's a huge priority for us to go get that rolling. But we have a service that runs on the back end of all app service apps called Kudu, and Kudu has a variety of APIs for sending a zip file up or using the virtual file system to actually access the files on disk. So we've already got people who've written PowerShell scripts for deploying functions up. You can use an ARM template to actually provision a function app and storage account and all that kind of stuff, and then push a function to it.
Yeah, Kudu supports like GitHub and it supports its own repository. So can I use those or not?
Yeah, so you can actually use GitHub. And if you go to the Azure Functions portal today and you click on Function App Settings, there's a continuous integration button. You can click on that, and we have support for GitHub, Bitbucket. We have Dropbox and OneDrive support. You can
I
use
didn't realize
external
that.
Git
Is
library.
awesome. Okay. I didn't even think you had that. So this is all like legitimate news to me. So I'm really excited about that now.
Yeah, no, I mean the great thing about this is by building on that existing platform, we have all these things that are working at least halfway.
Yeah.
And they just need polish, and polish is what we have time until GA to do.
Yeah.
Infragistics' ultimate UX and UI tools and enterprise mobility solutions, SharePlus and ReportPlus, enable high-performance apps on any device, faster data insights, simplified collaboration, and market-leading security, all backed by comprehensive support. With Infragistics' ultimate UX and UI development toolkit, you can ensure mission-critical applications delivering a superior user experience on the desktop, web, and native device environments for iOS and Android. With the latest BI tools, wow your users with dashboards providing the data insights that they need when and where they need it, all at a low total cost of ownership. Try it today. Download a free trial at Infragistics.com and follow them for the latest updates in UX and UI development, reporting, and collaboration at Infragistics on Twitter. And remember, each week, if we pick your comment on the show, you will get a free copy of Infragistics' Ultimate UX and UI toolset. We talked about earlier about scaling. So how does scaling happen with Azure Functions? Is it all kind of implicit behind the scenes, or is there something that I have to do with like some of the other Azure offerings?
So if you're using the dynamic tier, that's exactly what we're trying to do, is that you don't have to do anything. Essentially, you just choose your trigger, and we have intelligence inside of our scale controller to basically know that based off this trigger, we can go and look for the scale signals for that particular trigger. So for instance, for queues, we can look at the queue length. For Event Hub, we can actually go and look at the throughput through the Event Hub. For HTTP, we can actually look at the number of requests that you're getting per second. So it's essentially for each trigger that we have coming in, we've gone off and done this implementation where we know how to scale that trigger very well. If you're using the dedicated tier, that's where it's manual. You essentially choose the number of VMs that you want, and you can use what App Service has called, it's an auto scale feature to still set the kind of scaling up and down VMs approach, but you still have to kind of identify which signals you want to scale off of. We haven't made available to the dedicated tier yet our scale controller.
So when would I want to dedicate instances to this?
So for instance, if you have what you would call a consistent load for your functions, you know that you're always going to be taking about 1,000 requests per second from Event Hub, and you never expect that to spike or go down, then it's cheaper to just buy the VM because there's a premium that comes with having the kind of on-demand compute.
I gotcha.
And there's a certain point, certain little corners where it makes sense to actually buy that. There's other reasons. For instance, some enterprises just aren't comfortable with the serverless model yet. So you can start coding against the serverless model and then maybe switch later. Maybe you can trust that you just want to buy your VMs and you can trust that you have consistent pricing going on there. So there's a number of reasons, and it was easy essentially for us to just make it dedicated as available as an option because it was already built on App Service, and App Service already had dedicated VMs available.
Yeah, I guess some companies would get worried, like we don't want some mystery bill to show.
Yeah. I think what we'll end up wanting to do is thinking about some way where we can kind of be hybrid. You can always reserve a certain number of VMs available, but if you want to spill over into dynamic, we can probably play both those games.
Yeah.
So that's something we'll investigate into.
So, I mean, for anything that I'm going to build, I mean, I love the idea of dynamic. I mean, if I'm not working at a company that wants to exactly know the dollar amount each time, I mean, I'm going to have a good time in dynamic, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
I mean, that's where our focus is, right? Dedicated is basically done. We're not doing any additional work for dedicated.
It was free. Okay.
Yeah.
I gotcha. Okay. I just wanted to make sure I was understanding that properly.
No, our focus is entirely on like the serverless dynamic experience.
Okay.
100%.
So what about securing these? So I did go out there and I created one, and it was just like it was like a hello world where it would just like give like a simple like echo response. But is there some way I can secure it, or do I have to put some kind of front end on it? How does that work?
Sure. So there's a couple of options you have here. So the simplest, kind of function app inclusive way of doing this is if you're doing service to service based authentication, you can use webhook auth, in which case one service just uses the API key to call the other service.
Okay.
If you're having a user call directly to the function, we'd recommend that you look into using what we call Easy Auth internally. I think it's called authentication and authorization, the feature inside the portal. And you can actually put like Facebook or Twitter or AED authentication in front of your function. So basically, if you have like an Angular app and you want to extend this with another API, you can actually use that same identity provider using this authentication provider.
Okay, really cool. I can also use like API management, right?
Yeah, so that's kind of where I got onto the next step. So API management is actually right there. And they're all about, being able to basically manage your APIs across your application. So one really cool thing is if you have like an existing API application, like I wrote this with Web API or Express, but let's say I use like Web API 2 or, I'm still using like Express 2 for Node. I don't want to upgrade those things. I don't even want to add new code to this code base. Like it's just on its last legs. We just need to maintain it over the long term. But you need to add an API to it. Well, what you can actually do is with APIM in front of that API app, you can also extend that with functions. So you can add functions to extend the REST, API surface area, and APIM will actually manage the routing to the right function.
That's a good point. Yeah. So you have like your well, we'll call it legacy. That might be mean in some cases, but we have our legacy, and then we have our Azure Functions. To the user, they just see it all as one giant awesome API. Behind the scenes, we have our legacy code base and our new code base.
Yep, and you can use dynamic, and then once again, you're still able to just kind of ignore that API, right? If you just have something which needs to stay in kind of cold storage mode, it's the perfect way to extend that gently. Okay,
that's pretty cool. And then, what are the common use cases that you've seen so far? I know this has only been out like a few weeks now, but have you, you said you talked to customers and partners. What are the common use cases that you're seeing or hearing about?
So, I think that the most consistent use case that I've seen is the timer. Everyone needs time jobs and out there in the cloud. So that's probably the most consistent use case I've seen. But I've seen a lot of cool things done with HTTP. People have been building full REST endpoints, building REST APIs for their otherwise static sites, like you were talking about before. I've seen a lot of webhooks, so people connecting this in with Slack and Stripe and other services like that one. And then just recently, I think we saw someone was running 5 million executions in a very short period of time using Event Hub. So using this to do very high throughput event processing with IoT Hub. Okay. And so that's a new emerging one. I think IoT will probably be the one that we'll see grow the most. There's just so many events that happen in IoT. But HTTP and timer is probably the most accessible. That's one that we'll see more customers trying, and we'll probably see a fewer number of customers doing a high throughput for the IoT ones.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of stream processing where stream analytics is really easy and it keeps getting more and more powerful. But if you really want to do like custom stream logic for IoT scenarios, I could see this being a great fit because you could sort of, run code that analyzes the data that's coming in there, state management, stuff like that, kind of like almost like an actor model, or it could be potentially paired with that. But then also sort of aggregating those things. And, if you have multiple devices that are doing something, they could call another function and you can chain these things. And I've looked at this problem before, and it always came down to okay, how the heck do we scale this thing infinitely without, we have to keep firing up more machines, and how do we solve this problem? So that's why I'm super excited about, I just hand you the function and you just dynamically handle it for me. That's why I'm excited about the dynamic side of things.
Yeah, go ahead, Carl.
I was going to ask another question. You can go.
I was just gonna say when we first showed this to the IoT team, they basically had that same response. It's like, oh my
Yeah.
god, they
This
were
is what
using
we've been waiting for.
yeah, they were using web jobs before, but even with
Oh.
web jobs, you have to still manage the scale in, scale
Yep.
out problem. Taking that problem of managing the compute entirely away from users is a huge just kind of burden off their shoulders.
Yeah.
So is that scale factor really maybe the decision factor that I should look at instead of doing my own web jobs, web API solution? Because, I think a lot of times, like if I'm going to write this, I'm not going to just write one or two off things. I'm going to have essentially an API's worth when I'm doing something at least professionally or for a larger project. So is that really the biggest thing, just so I can remove that scale factor, or, is there other reasons to use this in those scenarios?
I mean, I think that there's kind of two kind of cases there, right? There's one case where I have something which is going to run very infrequently, and I don't want to pay for a full VM to run that on. And I have another use case where I don't know what the scale pattern will be. Build tickets will be sold, and the thing will just skyrocket, and I wasn't prepared, right? Theoretically, they run this on.
That hits close to home, man.
That'd have been okay. But that's kind of the examples that we're looking for, where you're either running in very low throughput, where it doesn't make sense to actually provision a full VM for the thing, or you're running on a very highly varying system, and it's just too costly to actually handle the scale in, scale out yourself.
Yep.
Our eyes are really big right now. We really want to tackle the high scale, hyperscale problem. So that's definitely where we're going to drive towards. The adoption blockers that you'll see in the meantime there are going to be just the fact that it's a new framework, essentially, right? This isn't, ASP.NET, which is really well trodden with lots of tooling and lots of expertise out there. It's a pretty much a new framework. So it's going to take time for us to get the right tooling, get the right community support, all that kind of stuff to come up with these good architecture patterns for building a full REST API with functions. We're going to see early adopters doing this. But if you're trying to have a 100 API site inside of functions, you'd probably struggle just because you're having to write each one's by itself without a whole lot of tooling to help you out.
Yeah,
so,
and then you have to figure out how to get them to talk to each other and.
Yeah, so once you've reached about like a dozen functions, we see some friction there. So for smaller scale things, it's definitely approachable now. For the bigger scale things, I'm not telling you not to do it. I'm telling you to do it and yell at me when you start running into friction, because we want to be there, right? Our sights are set very high in this one. We think this is going to be really, really cool, but we know that's going to take us, we're realistic. It's going to take us some time to kind of reach that same level of maturity as a lot of other projects.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because ultimately, I'd love to, because a lot of people talk about this whole like serverless architecture, and I'd love to get to that point where you do have to think a little bit differently in how you design things. It's almost sort of like a microservices / serverless, and it fits with a couple different scenarios. But yeah, it'd be nice for me to just like fire up a new repo in GitHub and start, with just a little bit of a change in my thinking, be able to define my application and then hand it over to you, and you see it as a whole bunch of different pieces, and each of those pieces has to be, dynamically handled. And then, we all win in that case.
Yeah, and there's frameworks out there that are trying to look into this. There's a framework called Go Serverless, and they've done this for Lambda, essentially, where they essentially let you write against their framework, and then they convert that over to functions, essentially, that they can then deploy.
I was looking at that, yeah.
And they also handle the API gateway stuff, which is a little bit difficult.
Yeah.
We're hoping that we can kind of develop those same relationships and essentially allow people to write against those frameworks and also manage to deploy out to functions. And those are the kinds of things that we'll need in order to mature up as a framework, is being able to have other tooling which can help abstract away some of the problems that come with moving from, I'm normally writing just this big set of code that is running as one giant service, to a bunch of essentially nano services is what we've got here with functions.
Yeah, that's a good way to call it. So if I have an existing web API, like, have you seen anybody like convert that over? Is that insanity? Should I not be thinking that way?
For like I said, if you are working with an application where you're talking about, I said a dozen, I'll say less than 2 dozen APIs, you'll be fine. There's not like that you'll run in. You'll have to change your thinking and all that kind of stuff. It's not the same tooling, those kinds of things. But you can totally make it happen. You can totally make it so that you're never having to manage scale again. You can handle really, really high loads. I actually have an exponential scale tester, and I was handling like 2 to the 14th, requests going through at one point. It was pretty crazy. Some really, really interesting things you can do with it. But like I said, the problem that you'll have is actually maintaining that application code base without the tooling. Those are going to be the things that you'll struggle with.
Yeah. Okay.
So what is the pricing on this, or what is the pricing once it goes GA, if you know that already?
Sure. I mean, it's free right now because we're basically trying to get more customer input on the pricing. So it's very affordable right now. When we actually announce the pricing, I mean, we're generally shooting to kind of looking at what the industry is doing, and we'll be pretty much price competitive with that. It's incredibly, like the latest set of numbers that I saw them run by. I'm not going to say the specific numbers so I don't get in trouble by them, but the latest set of numbers I saw, I was like, I can run that much for that little. It's really insane.
Yeah. So you had mentioned earlier too some phrase I had never heard before, and I didn't take a note of it, but it was like gigabits. I don't know, what was it? There was some measure for free.
Yes, it's gigabit seconds. Essentially, what you're doing there.
Seconds. Okay.
It's a combination of how much memory you've reserved times how much CPU seconds that you're using.
Okay.
So essentially, if you have reserved 128 megabytes of compute space and you run that for 30 seconds, you've consumed 3.75 gigabit seconds because it's 1/8 of a gigabyte times 30 seconds.
Okay. And how many of those do I get for free?
400,000, which is over 37 days, something like that, of like execution after execution after execution in the 128 megabyte space.
Okay. And then you mentioned the memory space. Is that something I have to define ahead of time? How does that work?
Yeah, there's a slider in the menu. Okay. So essentially, you'll just run out of memory. So if you are doing image processing, you probably want to scale that all the way up to the high end, and then go and look at your history to see how much memory you're using and scale that back down. For most HTTP functions we see, they are under 128, so you're probably safe.
Okay, but if I crank that the whole way up, I'm basically going to burn through those gigabit seconds.
Yes,
if I'm just doing like hello world, echo responses, I'm going to use basically a lot of those each time.
Yeah, and that's pretty much the last battlefield for us in order to actually abstract away the entire underlying server piece. Yeah. It's just it's figuring out the user experience for being able to see how much memory you need and then only charging you for that much memory. That is a problem that we still have yet to tackle.
Yeah, because the memory usage too can be sort of dynamic, and you got to calculate sort of the area. You're going to end up, using more CPU power just to calculate the actual requirements than to actually run the workload. So sort of speaking about that, any roadmap items you can talk about? I know in each of these you were like, oh, we're looking at this and thinking about this. I don't know if there's anything sort of concrete you can share or any thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, we're pretty much open besides the billing stuff because that involves the business folks. But in terms of features, we're pretty much open. I need to actually get this published on GitHub, but I've been giving presentation after presentation about it. We're working on tooling. We're working on making it so you can write your own extensions. So you can bring your own inputs and outputs into functions. So essentially, you can the current thing that the engineers are tossing around right now is actually just pointing out a NuGet package, and we'll import that NuGet package for you. And basically, that NuGet package is your extension. So I wrote a WebJobs extension probably 2 months ago. I had never written one before, and I'm not a .NET developer. I'm mostly a Node guy, and it only took me 6 hours. So 6 hours to get a Slack extension working was pretty quick.
Yeah.
So we're hoping that model will work out. We're still working through the details, but that's essentially our roadmap items: is focusing on GA, getting tooling, getting that going. We also have another cool thing coming out called. They're like Logic App connectors or API Hub connectors. I'm not sure if we've gotten the branding on that right yet, but they're essentially connectors out to SaaS services. You'll be able to trigger off of new tweets, new Dropbox items, etc. So you'll be able to actually trigger off of any data that you want out there. So that should multiply the number of triggers that we actually have available for people by like 2 or 3-fold.
No, that's an awesome point because we haven't talked about Logic Apps on the podcast yet, but you're right. You have these external input triggers like new tweet. We actually I have one of those set up that whenever there's a tweet about the MS Dev show, and it's not perfect, it's basically a Twitter search, it puts it into our Slack channel. So we can actually see what people are tweeting about with the show. So yeah, that'd be cool to pass it through that because we actually get some false positives because if it says like MS Dev show like anywhere in there, like for a while we were getting like these Office ones and just random other languages as well. Sometimes they'll trigger it. So I'd love to be able to run it through, basically call into a function, an Azure function that would maybe apply like another rule to it and then output it from there. That would be, oh man, that's just awesome. I mean,
And
all these pieces are starting to come together.
And you can do that today if you actually go to because you can still use Logic Apps to do
Yeah,
this
because you
stuff.
can make an HTTP call, right?
Exactly. So with Logic Apps, you can go to Logic Apps today, and Logic Apps actually has a functions trigger type in it now. So
it does.
If you go to Logic Apps and you click on the select connectors, and the same way that you choose an API app, you now have the choice to choose a function today. And so you can write this today. Have a Twitter trigger, have a function do some small transformation or filtering, and then pipe that out to Slack using their Slack connector.
Oh, that's so cool.
So we've seen a lot of those things as well. And I'm going to be giving a talk at Integrate 2016 here next month, where I'll be doing lots of demos of that.
Okay. This is so exciting. This is I've been waiting for a long time for this.
Yeah, I mean, right now it's pretty much just, extending Logic App scenarios, and we're basically kind of re-energizing a lot of the scenarios that web jobs did. But we have a lot of really cool ideas for the future that we'll be getting feedback on, like being able to program the internet, being able to write code against any event that could happen anywhere on the internet, anywhere in the cloud. Yeah. And this is really just a new way of writing code and making applications in a very loose, lightly coupled way.
Yeah, web jobs are cool, but I mean, just to be honest, like in retrospect, like I was never that excited about them because it just wasn't the same experience. The fact is, for Azure Functions, I was able to go out there. It said I created a new one, and then I said, "Here's my code." I mean, I just wrote it in the browser for mine, and that was it. I actually sent out the URL then to some people, and I said, "Hey, call my Azure function," and I could actually see too in the logs that it was being called. That was it, and that was profound for me. Web jobs, you got it. There's just some work you have to do, and they have their place, but this is just awesome. It's just so easy to see why it's so cool.
And that's basically how this whole thing got started. I took over web jobs almost this time last year. I was working on the mobile team before that, and this web jobs project kind of needed a new owner. And I'm a Node dev, and this is a .NET product, and I'm like, why can't I write Node against this thing? And so we just kind of started playing around with writing Node inside of this framework, and then at the same time, we had the extensions model come around, and we had this, notion that we wanted to build something which could do serverless, and all these pieces kind of came together, and it just kind of felt really natural in the end to just have this flow out. So it was a journey that took 9 months or so, but really in the last 3 months before build, that's when it all kind of really came together. We went from having 3 or 4 people working on this to having 30 people work on this. So we've got a nice big team that's all really energized to make this stuff successful.
Cool. Anything else you wanted to mention?
I mean, I guess I could plug. If you go to functions.azure.com, that is the easiest way to get started with functions. If you have an Azure account set up already, it'll go in there and create a function app for you. It takes, I think, 30 seconds when I tried it this morning. And then you're right there. You've got this app provisioned, ready to start writing functions against it. It's very easy. And then you can follow me, at CrandyCodes on Twitter if you want to see latest updates. I tweeted the F# thing. We added IntelliSense support, so you can kind of watch the updates come along from there. And we also have a blog post you can follow to get the updates, but tweets are kind of real time. As I see the devs pushing out the changes, I go and send a tweet, hey, this feature's live now.
Oh, that's awesome. Okay, Carl, should we move on to the dev tip?
Sure.
Okay, what do you got?
So this is a really, really cool Visual Studio 2015 extension. It's written by Mads Christensen, so we know that he's always pumping these out.
Yeah.
So what this is, it's called Learn the Shortcut. So if you do something in Visual Studio that's not with a keyboard shortcut, it'll display it in the bottom what the keyboard shortcut is. If you hover over it, you'll see a little tooltip that'll pop out saying what it was. Like if you did went to the edit menu and then went to find, it'll show you went edit.find. It'll show you that you could have just hit Control F. And on top of that, it also outputs this to the output window. So if you don't catch it in the bottom, you'll also see it in your output window.
Oh, that is so cool.
And if you actually do a shortcut, so if you hit Control F, it won't show you that. So it'll only show it to you when you're not using it.
So this is whenever I'm sitting next to a non-techie and they're, I'm sitting next to my dad and I'm like, oh, go to this site. And of course, he goes up to the address bar. He types in google.com. And then he types in the search, he doesn't always do this. Hopefully he doesn't listen to this episode. But I have seen him do this, though. And I've seen people do this. Then he'll type HTTP and he'll put out the whole thing in msdevshow.com. He searches for it, clicks on the first result, And I'm sitting there just just, like type the address up there or type the search thing or whatever, So basically the shortcut is me, but for the shortcuts in Visual Studio, which is what I need. I need the smarter person yelling at me saying like, you should learn the shortcut so that you can save time next time.
Well, and sometimes you don't even know what they are because I mean, I don't
have time for that.
In a menu, they show it to you, so it's a little bit more obvious. But sometimes you're using it through a different tool or on the toolbar or something like that. It doesn't always show it to you. So this is a really cool way just to make that visible and kind of just, a way to teach yourself how to do that.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Okay. So we play a game on the show. I guess you did listen to at least one episode, so you're familiar with this. Oh, actually, no, we didn't play this on the last episode. We didn't. Did we do it on the build one?
Yeah.
No, we didn't.
Okay, so
I'm
you
out
have
of the
no
loop
clue.
here.
Okay. So I need you to pick a number between 1 and 4 inclusive.
3.
3. Okay. We haven't done this one, so this is awesome. This is a kid's game. Would you rather spend the rest of your life in a submarine or in a spaceship?
Spaceship.
Yeah, I know. This is.
So I was originally an aerospace engineer in college, and it was all about like maybe potentially being an astronaut at first. I quickly realized how idealistic that was and switched over to computer science. But I would definitely take the spaceship, especially looking at like what SpaceX just did. Like that future is like open.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and I recently went on vacation to Florida, and we visited the Cape Canaveral grounds, and they have a video kind of showing like what the future of space is. And in there, it said like if you're a kid between like 5 and 15, you're actually are eligible to be an astronaut in the next missions that could potentially go to Mars.
Yeah.
Wow.
And the number of astronauts could go exponential based on the exponentially dropping costs of space travel.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. They're going to have inflatable spaceships now too. I think that was something I saw. There's a
Really?
we had the blimps and we had all the Zeppelins and stuff. We're going to do that all again in space because it's much cheaper to lift that lightweight material up there, and then they have like goo that'll fill in any holes that come from like micro meteorites.
Okay.
But really cool idea because you could basically assemble these things and you can have backup spaceships with you inside of your main spaceship.
Yeah, it's funny. There's so many ideas now. It's just we'll have to sort of experiment and see which one wins.
Or like we have a new renaissance of kind of space travel coming around soon.
It kind of feels like we are. I mean, with the whole like SpaceX, and then you have what the heck is his name from Amazon, Bezos. Yep. You have him, or Bezos, however you pronounce it. You have like him doing his whole space thing. I mean, it's almost like another mini space race. You have a space race of privatization, and we just had that spaceship. I don't know what do you call it, rocket or whatever. It landed on the barge. It's just so cool. Yeah. And I listened to Elon Musk's book. And it's really neat the stuff that they're doing because like the computer, they talked about how that thing they were going to order one that's like all hardened, and I want to say I don't know if it was $50,000 or $150,000 for this computer. It's just a terrible computer. I mean, it's like as bad as like this Mac Mini here, and Elon is just like, that's just unacceptable. And they ended up like building their own, and they did it for, I want to say like $1,500 or something. And they're like, yeah, this is good enough. Throw this in there. This is what we're using. Maybe throw a second one in there for redundancy. I mean, they're questioning the old way of doing everything. I mean, every single screw that NASA ever purchased was, $50,000. So it's neat to see this going on. Okay, Carl, what number do you want?
I'll take number 1.
Number 1. Wow. Would you rather pick a carpet clean with tweezers instead of vacuuming? I don't even know how that's possible. Or trim the lawn with nail clippers instead of mowing? I think you might have had this one before. I remember the nail clippers.
I would rather do the lawn.
Yeah, I think that's what you picked last time too.
100%.
At least you're consistent. I was going to start crossing these off, but I don't have a permanent marker here. I'm going to get one and start doing that. Okay. So you did mention earlier your Twitter handle. Why don't you mention that again so people know where to find you?
Sure. It's at Crandy Codes.
Okay.
So Crandy Codes.
Okay. That sounds awesome. And then in our show notes, we'll have links to the various pages for Azure Functions. Otherwise, if you just search for Azure Functions, that stuff shows up. So that's super exciting. Carl, where can people find you?
You can find me on Twitter at Carl Schweitzer.
And you can find me at ytechie.com or on Twitter at twitter.com/ytechie. So Chris, thank you so much for coming on and talking about this. Cause like I said, I'm super excited about this. I've just gotten started. I think now as stuff comes up for the MS Dev show or my blog, I'm going to start using Azure Functions. I'm just super excited about this. So thank you so much for coming on here and talking to us about this.
It's great to hear. Thanks for having me. This was a lot of fun.